Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Hello. Now it seems the Ubisoft Forward conference is on July 12th, where they'll have a ton of new information, different bits and bobs that they're going to drop. But obviously, because we're so close to a big conference happening, all sorts of leaks and things like that are starting to come out. So in regards to Far Cry 6, one Giancarlo Esposito, you'll know him as Gus Fring from Breaking Bad, or just the Chicken Man, was talking to Collider last week, and he said that he was working on a game. He said, this video game I did, which is going to be huge, but he can't really mention it. He said it's got a new style of acting or whatever. And a lot of people started assuming that this was maybe in relation to Far Cry 6, because it kind of made sense that something, that's a kind of slot to fill. Like he's a big villain type dude, and something like Far Cry is going to need a big villain type dude. So this was then confirmed by Game Reactor, who just in the middle of an article just said, hey, we'll spoil that for you. The game he's referring to is Far Cry 6. That article has now been deleted. It was reposted and then deleted again, which is obviously always the smoke and gun, the confirmation. So what do you think of Mr. Giancarlo Chicken Man dropping into Far Cry 6?
Big fan, Scott. Like you know, we've talked about this before. Like Better Call Saul is one of my favorite TV shows on the air today. So the fact that the gaming world is just getting all of these great actors, like we had Michael Mando, who was a major player in Better Call Saul, who was Vaas in Far Cry 3. So then to get Giancarlo Esposito, who is just as much of a presence and a great actor. Like even regardless of his villainous roles, I think ever since Breaking Bad, he's sort of been kind of pigeonholed as this kind of soft-spoken but incredibly intimidating villain. But he is very kind of versatile and diverse and is incredibly strong. So to get him, if he is the main villain for Far Cry 6, I am absolutely in, and I'm excited, because even though I haven't loved the recent Far Cry games, I've still enjoyed them, and I do think that when it comes to casting especially, they've always got that like on the hit. They've hit the nail on the head every single time in terms of who they've casted as the villains. The writing of the villains has kind of, to me, fallen away a little bit since Vaas and Far Cry 3, so I hope Giancarlo gets kind of a meaty role that essentially does his talents justice. If they manage to give him something worthwhile to chew on, I think it'll be an incredible thing, and I'm very much looking forward to see how he pulls it off, because he mentioned that even though he's done video games before, this seems like it's new to him. It seems like it's a much bigger role and a much more of a performance than what he's done previously.
I do hope that, on the Ubisoft side, that they've got some sort of new, more advanced facial tech, because Assassin's Creed Valhalla is obviously leaked. There's some stuff out there, but we're going to wait and talk about that when the more official stuff is out for the Forward show. But that kind of showed the facial animation in comparison to stuff like Red Dead 2, Final Fantasy 7, Last of Us. Like, Ubisoft kind of need to catch up a little bit, and I hope that the Giancarlo thing is like a hint that maybe going forward, next gen or whatever, Ubisoft have finally started getting something like that, where it's maybe more in-depth facial scanning. One thing I was going to ask alongside that, though, is like this kind of hints that they're still going with the big villain, big wacky villain Far Cry template. If they do go with that, are you tired of that, or do you think that is just like a series staple at this point?
Yeah, I feel like, it's really difficult with Far Cry, right? Because it has all of these different series staples that in and of themselves aren't necessarily bad or boring. I just think that Ubisoft needs to breathe new life into them. So the idea of having kind of a killer, amazing, kind of out there villain as the central driving force of the game, in and of itself isn't kind of like a bad thing. Like, that could result in so many memorable bad guys in the video game space. It's just that they've relied on that a little bit too much as a crux, and it's kind of become their thing, so they haven't really pushed what they can do with that role. It's just, well, we've got one, so we'll tick this box, and hopefully going forward, what I want to see with Far Cry 6 is not necessarily them throwing out the rule book or necessarily tearing up all of these different tropes. It's just kind of finding a new way to reinvigorate them with more passion and more life, and kind of be a little bit bolder with them, be a little bit more daring, give, like I said, the characters and the actors a little bit more to chew on, a little bit more to do, a little bit more of a presence in the story. Because I think where Far Cry 5 especially kind of was let down a little bit is that it adopted the Ghost Recon Wildlands kind of approach to mission design, where you had a bunch of different territories and you were taking out the lieutenants of these territories, but that meant you can do the story in kind of more of a free-form order, which meant that you couldn't really have more of a structured presence to the kind of bad guys because you could tackle them in any order. They didn't really intersect, and it meant they were just kind of static and waiting there until you kind of got to them. So you were just kind of going, you're knocking one down, you go to the next one, you're knocking him down, then you got to the main boss at the end, you know what I mean?
Well, I thought that it felt like they played their wacky villain card like 5 times in that game. Like you had like obviously Joseph Seed as the big leader, but then all the brothers and sisters that he had or whatever, like they were just, every single one of them was over the top. There was that woman that was really ghostly and in control of like supernatural powers and stuff, and it was like, like I said, it's almost become like pastiche at this point. Like they kind of need to do something that's more self-aware, like have a villain sort of, someone address like the fact that, oh, you're gonna kill your right hand man, and he says like, no, who would do that, or something like that. Like I want something that sort of addresses the fact that they've played this card over and over again. And even with Pig and Min, it was like, oh, they're just sort of doing this again. Even though Pig and Min's a drastically different character from Vaas, but it's like, you know, we're gonna have this big sort of main evil villain dude. I kind of want something more fresh. And I guess getting someone like Giancarlo, he's not going to be, assumedly not going to be wacky and over the top. He would be something that's way more grounded. But yeah, what do you think of like tonally? Do you think do you think Far Cry should play into its more wacky stuff that they've kind of embraced in 5, like with certain characters, or go more old school like Far Cry Instincts or things like that?
I think it just kind of needs a balance. I think I agree with you that Far Cry 5, especially with the kind of like the religious family that they had, kind of like overdid it so much where every single person you were up against was kind of just another version of this over the top kind of, they're crazy. They're going to inject you with a lot of hallucinogenics and drugs. And I think Far Cry as a franchise has kind of relied on that a bit too heavily to try and have its cake and eat it too. It wants this kind of like semi-grounded world with gritty and visceral violence, but then it also wants to do the wacky stuff, so it does inject your character full of like drugs, and it contrives reasons to have the more imaginative segments. And I love both versions. It's just, it often feels like the writers are trying to contrive ways to kind of satisfy both parts of the Far Cry fan base in a way with a main game. So here I think, what I can see them doing is, because you've got someone, like Giancarlo in the main role, like you said, known for his more subdued, kind of subtly intense performances. You have him as kind of like the main ringleader, then you have like the wackier lieutenants or whatever. You have people who are a bit crazier doing the more brutal things that he wouldn't necessarily get his hands dirty with, but that's more or less just judged off the persona that he's kind of cultivated over the past few years on TV. They might utilize his talents in a completely different way, and I'd also be kind of up for that, because I feel like, I don't want them to just kind of play it safe with him, if that makes sense. I don't want them to get him in so you can just do Gus Fring, because he's so much more than just Gus Fring,
I think, if they do him where he's the untouchable guy at the top, and you sort of have like I said, that would be a way to sort of address the crazy, wacky dudes. Like you can have a bunch of them, you can have your leaders, your generals or whatever, but they're all getting carried away, and you work your way up to the top. I don't know, Far Cry feels like it's become super formulaic. Like I think that the amount of DLC they did for 5, and each one of them just kind of felt like, and they had the map editor and stuff as well. It was like, we've kind of boiled this down to, here are the elements that make up Far Cry. And I kind of want something like super fresh, like something that you just don't see coming. And I'm curious about Giancarlo. He's a big get, and I hope that this is like a new way to steer into some territory that they haven't done before. But yeah, at the same time, do you expect like other stuff to change, like in terms of gameplay, formulaically, like go into the towers, or like getting the crafting components by skinning a bunch of animals and stuff like that, or like because it's numbered, I guess it kind of has to be. But I don't know. I
feel like there will be some kind of jump forward, because even though Far Cry 5 wasn't a radical shift away from 4 and 3, it did change a lot of things up for the better, and kind of brought some quality of life changes. Like you said, it had that joke about the towers, that they weren't going to do that anymore. They were going to
they did it anyway, right?
They did kind of like, not really. They didn't have towers. They kind of had something slightly different. But I feel like as long as they keep pushing forward in that direction, because for me, Far Cry 5 mechanically was a huge step forward. It was just a bit of a shame that the structure of the main missions kind of took a step back for me. But like the way it made you more immersed in the world, for me, was like a huge win. I haven't had that much fun exploring an Ubisoft open world sandbox in so long, and I think that was the last time I really indulged in kind of the world building. Like if you compare it to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I loved for 20 hours, that was such an Ubisoft game.
Everybody did.
Everyone did, yeah. Like that was such an Ubisoft game where you enjoyed the stuff that was happening, but it was so bloated and so overstuffed that it was so easily you felt overwhelmed quite easily, whereas when it comes to Far Cry, I always feel like this is a series that's kind of slightly more focused than the other Ubisoft open world games, if that makes sense. There's still a lot to do, and there's still a lot of capital C content, but it's not overwhelming in the same way. It might get repetitive in the same way, but I always felt like there's more of a through line, like strong goal to that series, where I don't necessarily mind when the Ubisoft stuff kind of like seeps in a little bit more, because it's not completely crushed under its own weight.
Man, I think if there's one thing that they need to address, like next generation, it's the bloat. It's that Ubisoft bloat that they've just had in everything. It was just hyper inflate every piece of game design until it takes, like you said, the first 20 hours of Odyssey, totally solid, like really enjoyable combat and whatever, but then it goes on for 10 times that length, and it just draws itself out. And even the small bits that they've shown of Valhalla, it's like, okay, you guys are kind of going back to that route again, but obviously the development comes from, it's the last few years. But I would hope that it'd be the same for Far Cry, but I hope that going forward maybe they've thought ahead and just thought, look, people are going to be pretty sick of this. We've done it a lot of times in a row. And maybe Far Cry 6 being the cross-generational release, it can be something that is promising as to where they're going to go next gen.
What makes me kind of optimistic about it, not only from what they've done in the previous game and the kind of like the criticism they took on board for the spin-off New Dawn, for instance, but I feel like there was a big shift in kind of Ubisoft's approach to the games they were making, like at the end of last year, where they delayed that kind of essentially like 2020's early hitters. They delayed Watch Dogs, they delayed Gods and Monsters, they delayed
that exists.
Exactly, man. They delayed Rainbow Six Quarantine, and essentially the mandate was, look, we don't want to keep making the same game over and over again. We realized that this isn't up to snuff. You guys don't necessarily want it. It's not good for kind of growing the brands. So hopefully those decisions that were made last year have impacted Far Cry in like a positive way.
You would hope so. I mean, let us know what you think down in the comments below. What sort of role do you think Giancarlo will have? Do you want him to just be Gus Fring in the Far Cry universe, or do you want him to do something else? I want him to lose half his face, to be honest, at some point. I just want that to be the end of a boss battle or something, and then have him just adjust his tie. Let's know what you think down. Maybe. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. And yeah, for now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
I will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.